Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I have as usual with these webinars, we will give it a couple of minutes as we have a few people popping in just as they're wrapping up their Tuesday afternoon calls. But I hope everyone's having a good day, good week, and we're all kind of gearing up for a long weekend. Obviously, coming up this weekend, I think the weather's supposed to be excellent, and we can't do a UK-based webinar without at least mentioning the weather. But hello, everybody. See a few more people coming in. Good afternoon. Right, we'll get into the actual meat of it in 2 seconds, but we may as well use the first minute or two while people are still joining, just to do introductions for who we've got on the call this week, for who's talking really. And this is going to be a Centelli duo that you've got in front of you. So personally, first is Sam Cornford. That's me. I'm Director of Business Development at Centelli and pretty much responsible for all of our customers and what we do from an automation and AI delivery standpoint. And I'll let Aneesh introduce himself as well.
Hello, everyone. I founded Centelli. My background is implementing ERP systems. Like businesses, like to understand how they work, but have a slightly more affinity towards technology. So trying to bring the two things together and seeing how technologies can help businesses and us be more productive.
Brilliant. Thank you, Aneesh. Sorry, I clicked share before you finished there. I wasn't trying to get you to stop your introduction, but I think we've got a few more people that have joined, so we'll get cracking. So this is the Centelli Hate It or Automate It webinar series. And the topic that we're going to talk about today is the difference between personal AI and enterprise AI. And obviously what's happened over the last few years is we really have seen some massive leaps and bounds in pretty much every way imaginable. But what we're going to do is look at and discuss why sometimes those the progress in one area on the personal side has been different to the enterprise side, and what's actually possible for businesses. So the way we'll actually look at it today is we'll look at AI and why, or talk about why AI has been picked up so much quicker than a lot of the other technologies that have come through over the last 20 or 30 years and beyond. And again, really focusing on what's relevant for personal, what's relevant for enterprise AI, and where that, as we start to go up the curve, where it starts to go through users, how that breaks, how we scale it, if it is possible to scale, and then talking about how some of the things that we should be thinking about from a personal perspective and businesses as well, and then the sort of actions that you can be taking if it's something that you want to proceed with. Now, over the last 100 years, there's been a few real big technology introductions, stretching all the way back to when the telephone was first introduced. We obviously had the mobile phone and the smartphone, then www with the internet and Instagram, and then ChatGPT. What you're seeing here is the speed that each of these technologies reached 100 million users globally by. So when we look at the telephone, 75 years to actually get 100 million users to use that. Scaling that through, obviously, with the mobile phone, quicker to develop, quicker to deploy, for lots of people were able to pick that up, 16 years, and then all the way through to ChatGPT, 2 months. One of the reasons that really ChatGPT and AI has been around for a long time, but we're really talking about ChatGPT and the generative AI when we look at the speed of this new revolution that's come through since really the end of 2023, is the fact that we're able to adopt it on an individual basis rather than just at an enterprise level. Now, some people will probably remember when I think it was the IBM product. I think it was called IBM Watson. IBM Watson came out quite a few years ago now, but it wasn't the sort of thing that we were able to consume on an individual level, because you would need an endless amount of money and technical capability to be able to actually get some value out of it. What ChatGPT was able to unlock for individuals is the fact that we were able to have a conversation with AI to generate an output, rather than us having to have these coding skills or these technology skills to be able to do it. So everyone on this webinar must have used ChatGPT at some point. We can obviously just quickly log in, ask it a question, get an answer back. If we're happy with the answer, we can then take whatever we need and move on. But we're able to actually turn that into a conversation with ChatGPT in front of us. It means that natural language is the thing that unlocks ChatGPT for anyone to be able to use it. So if you've got access to the internet, you've got access to ChatGPT, and that really was why the speed of adoption has been much quicker than anything we've ever seen. The one of the things that's quite critical about ChatGPT is there's always that disclaimer that a person is still accountable for the output that comes through. So even an individual that's trying to use ChatGPT to work out what their holiday itinerary is going to be, or how to draft an email to a customer, or anything that is being asked, it's still down for the human or the person that's actually asking those questions to review that output that's coming back before they then share it onwards. It always means that accountability is never shifted. But there is a big difference between what we are able to use ChatGPT for on an individual basis and what we're able to do at an enterprise level. Now, the difference between the computer systems that we've had for the last 20, 30 years and generative AI is the way it actually makes decisions. So everything from ERP applications to HR systems to robotic process automation, everything that's built within those systems is based on a binary rules-based. Something needs to fit a certain criteria for it to move on. It means that it's auditable. We can actually see how decisions are made. We can actually map out how decisions are made, and we can see the detail on there. It takes a long time to sometimes get these things ready and actually deploy these big applications when we're moving through these transformation programs. But once we have done the large testing phases and we move that on, we know it's good. We're ready to deploy it, and then it means that it's in place in perpetuity until something gets moved on. But pretty much everything, it's very black and white. Something has to fit, otherwise it doesn't fly. And if it doesn't fly, we then go back around into another round of testing until it works. Generative AI is on the probabilistic side. So generative AI, we use generative AI where it's too hard to really write rules for something to be able to be done. So we can't actually see, when you chat to that's a tongue twister, chat to ChatGPT, you can ask it a question and you obviously get an answer back, but we can't break down the answers underneath and see how the ChatGPT came up with the answers that's come back. It isn't, other than you also do get the bits where it can say mention it in a website here or mention a link, but it won't give you a sheer map of why I've said this, why I've chosen to include this piece of information, why I've chosen to exclude this piece of information, and so on. And because it's probabilistic and not binary, it means that like we will get stuff wrong. ChatGPT will sometimes get things wrong as well. And, there's some quite famous examples of ChatGPT hallucinating different things that might have not happened, that might be fictional. I remember reading an article, I think it was last year at some point, but it was done by a Sky News journalist. And he was getting ready for one of his webinars or one of his podcasts. And he was putting his agenda into ChatGPT and saying, right, this is what we've got. Can I look at what I've used before, and trying to come up with the content for it? And ChatGPT came back to him and said, I've, this is actually the content that you sent me on this date, and this is what we were going to use. And he ended up having an argument with ChatGPT because he was certain that he had not got that back in there, and he kept providing evidence back to ChatGPT saying, no, you don't know where you got this from. I think you've come up with this one, to the point that ChatGPT actually said, yeah, you're right. I've hallucinated this one. You haven't sent me this, and I'm sorry, and this is what we should work with. And because of that, it's that black box. We can't see what goes inside that black box. It isn't auditable, so we're not able to do the same thing that we can see with computer applications or rules-based automation, where we can really see what the background to that one is. So there's the differences really there between the deterministic and the probabilistic side, where we use computer systems and generative AI. Right, I'm going to hand over to Aneesh. He's going to kick on from here.
Thanks, Sam. So the challenge this leaves us with is, if you go back to AI and saying, what did you do on a particular transaction at a particular point in time, it won't be able to tell you. A person might be able to explain it to you. A model but an AI model would only re-reason it, and it may or may not come up with what it actually did. Okay? So what does it mean for us from a practical perspective is, one, when we're trying to audit this, the trying to get a replay of what happened is virtually impossible. It's going to re-reason, it's not going to replay. If you think of what a person does, a person will in more probability either remember what they did, or they will apply the same reasoning that they had applied at that point in time and tell you what could have happened. Secondly, when we look at service levels, because behavior is no longer guaranteed, we cannot have firm service levels. We can only have statistical service levels. So we can only say that certain scenarios should meet a certain level of service or outcome X percentage of the time, and that percentage is going to be somewhere between high 90s would be really good to achieve, 80s is realistic, 70 is where it's going to start. Okay. The third thing we need to look at is accountability. So who owns a call? It can't be the model or the vendor. It has to be a named user within the business. If you think of what's happening with a lot of autonomous drivings in cars, ignoring the Waymos because they've taken it to a different level, the driver is still accountable. The driver still has to keep their hands on the wheel. Likewise, when we're doing AI, we have to have somebody whose hands are on the AI wheel. And third thing, and last thing, sorry, is regulation. Regulation is not, it's not recorded. Decisions aren't being recorded. It becomes a little bit of an opinion. When we have dependencies on users, we have to be firmer in what goes on. And there are ways around it, but these are the four challenges that we face. If you go to the next one, please. The other one that no one's actually considering, and this is fairly fundamental in our view of what's happening with AI, is we're used to buying software. And software is you buy once, run forever, or you run for a period of time. What's happening with generative AI is you're effectively buying or incurring a cost every time it runs. So we're going from a fixed or a step cost, something that's calculatable relatively reliably, to a variable per transaction cost. And the variation of transactions, variation of cost per transaction can also be fairly complex. Now, there are differences that play in both favor. So when you look at traditional tech, you have a salary, you have a license, there's infrastructure, but it's relatively known and stable. When we're looking at generative AI, whilst the cost per transaction is relatively small, depending upon the number of transactions you have, the cost can end up being significantly higher. And as you scale, your costs will go up as well. When we start to get into the more complex AI with agents and agents determining what needs to happen, or we start to think about multiple AI models talking to each other, the cost, controlling the cost becomes another task that does need to be considered. So when we are looking at adopting AI, we do have to fundamentally understand that we are going from a fixed cost CapEx style of a costing model to an OpEx style costing model. Okay. Sam, if you go to the next slide, please. So where does this summarize into, and how do we think about it? We were thinking as to the easiest way to understand this, and I think the easiest way to understand is, who is the target of AI? If the target of AI is an individual, the behavior it needs to form is very different to the behavior we needed to see when we're looking at targeting a business. So we call that personal AI when we're targeting a user. And this comes in two forms. It comes in the form of either internal user, and we're looking at it as a productivity tool, or an external consumer where we're looking at one single consumer. On the enterprise side, we're looking at a business doing transactions with another business. Yep. So personal AI is one person. Enterprise AI is a process at scale. Personal AI, the accountability stays with the person. So even if you look at what's happening with us and how we're using it and why ChatGPT reached 100 million users, that's because this is all personal AI. We're all using it to become more productive and do things we didn't do in the past. but fundamentally the output is our responsibility. If we go in taking something that is hallucinated and not have done our proper fact checks, we can't turn around to anybody else and blame. We have to carry the blame. When we're thinking of enterprise AI, the accountability shifts to the firm. And there was a good use case I was talking to a senior industry leader last week. If you think of travel management within a business, and a business has travel management as a function, having an AI tool help the individual traveler decide a travel itinerary, absolutely that's personal AI. But in the back end, how that transaction then gets executed, how it gets invoiced, how the entire process flow works, that is still a business to business transaction, and we need that to be more reliable. And that forms into the category of enterprise AI. Okay. So personal AI, it's being a thinking partner, and again, the same analogy does apply. Whereas when we're thinking of enterprise, we need every transaction to be more reliable. In the case of personal AI, if it fails, it's the individual who didn't check the work. Whereas when we think of enterprise AI, if it fails, thousands of decisions can become wrong, and the enterprise carries the responsibility for it. We've already talked about cost model, and then comes governance, which we will talk about in a minute. When it comes to personal AI, it's the individual's common sense, it's the individual's experience that has to apply and has to establish that, is this something I'm happy with? When we make our itinerary for travel for a holiday, whether I like it or not, end of the day is up to me. But if I'm making a business trip and something goes wrong within that, then there's more accountability over there. Okay. So think of this as, when you're thinking of AI, think of who the target is and what are we trying to achieve through the use of that AI. Another good example we use is when we look at invoice processing. Invoice processing example, which is enterprise AI. We need it to be reliable. We need the process to work at scale. If an invoice doesn't get processed right and a supplier suffers, the enterprise has a problem. Whoever is the owner for that particular purchase, they're the ones who are going to have to be accountable to the supplier. Okay, so fairly important way of thinking about it, and I think it does simplify how we go about adopting AI and how we start thinking about how we can use it to be more productive in our organizations. Sam, next slide, please.
I'm going to just interject a second. So yeah, I think you mentioned it earlier. You talked about self-driving cars. So it feels like as a people, we're willing to accept AI in certain parts of our lives, but only if the accuracy of it is probably greater than that of a human being. So with self-driving cars using AI either are gonna be, or they are, and this is where probably I will ask you, Aneesh, but more safe than what people are driving on the road. People are, really susceptible to making mistakes. We're tired, you might sleep, and that's why there's always so many accidents. But are people more willing to accept like an accident from a human driving a car than they would be AI driving a car, do you think?
So it's easy to shift accountability. And when you take the driving example, it's regulation that has been a challenge, and we still haven't figured out how regulation would work for that. How do we shift accountability from the human, which is easy to speak to an AI model with whom we cannot have a conversation? A good example that gets used is, let's say there's something that comes on the road for which the car swerved to avoid it, and an accident took place. A human would probably remember. It could be an animal, in which case you could turn around and potentially say, you shouldn't have. It could be a child, in which case you should turn around and say, it was the right thing to do. But you can at least have a conversation. We can at least debate it and figure out how we get better. We can't do that with AI. So I think it's easy for people to shift accountability, but we have to remember, end of the day, we are still responsible to each other, and we need to carry that. And that's where the enterprise AI and how we approach it needs to still stay, where We can think of AI as boost to the organization and where we use it, and we'll talk about that on the next slide. But we still have to have somebody who's still accountable for that particular AI model and what it does.
Super. Thank you.
So where does AI fit in? And AI is evolving. The simplest way of doing AI is AI that answers. This is our classic daily Gen AI use cases, drafting emails, doing some thinking, coming up with answers to questions that we might not have an easy way of doing. Okay. The next thing we can then scale this up to is AI that does a certain set of tasks. So we ask AI to do tasks that we would want, but at scale. The difference between, in a perfect world, scenario 2 shouldn't exist. However, the challenge of trying to implement scenario 2 in a deterministic, constrained world, resource constrained world, is we're not able to define all the rules for it easily, or it takes time to implement all the rules because of all the variations and the different scenarios, and that needs a lot of resource to do. With AI, we can easily type in a prompt. There was another use case we had around costing and trying to come up with cost products. It was an 1,800 line prompt at the end that got built. But it was much faster to change a prompt because it was natural language versus going to a system and writing code for it. Okay. So AI that does work can scale significantly faster than what we can do with deterministic systems. The third thing we look at is AI that acts, and that is taking AI that's able to go in and interact with other systems and applications. So the AI agent decides what needs to get done and also then executes on it. In each case, the cost of AI is going to be higher. And in the third one in particular, estimating the cost is slightly tricky because the amount of work that AI might need to do, how many screens it needs to read, all of that is cost that will get incurred. Whilst the token cost is measured in pennies, the number of tokens that get used is significantly higher. Okay, so what we say is understand where do you want AI to be doing, understand which stage it fits in at, and then there are ways of simplifying it which can help you scale. Okay. So go to the next slide, please. So what is our recommendation for how you should go about building enterprise AI? Do it in bite-sized chunks. The first thing to do is look at tasks, not processes. So don't do end-to-end processes and hand them over to AI. Technically, it's capable of doing it. Our ability to manage it at an enterprise and ensure reliability is very low, though. So what's the difference? A task is interpret this invoice, interpret this email, and tell me what needs to get done. Okay. Don't ask it to do complete end-to-end order management and hand it over. The equivalent we use is we say, if you were to hire a human, you wouldn't put them in your business and saying, you're a smart person, you've done order management before, you can go figure out how to enter our orders. No, you say, this is how we do order management, and these are the bits that we need you to master. We do the same thing with AI. We say, here are different tasks that need to happen along the process that we can control, that we can measure. And that's what we're going to start building our processes off. We can have multiple AIs involved, but at the end of the day, each one needs to be looked at in a bound space. Okay. The second is ban the decision space. Do not let AI decide every single possible scenario that can come up with. Give it a set of inputs and define exactly the set of outputs you would like, because then you can combine control points, because you say, these are the only outputs I expect. If this happens, that's what I want happening next. If this happens, that's what I want happening next. So we're trying to put an element of deterministic thinking into and use our probabilistic world to handle variation that we're not able to do. So we're trying to get to the best of both worlds. Number 3, log everything. Every input that comes in, every output that goes out, every model that is getting used, and the version, the prompt, and the token counts. This audit trail is going to be fundamental to us being able to, one, improve the model and make sure we understand where it is. Number 2, go back and also look at things. If things don't go right, where did it go wrong? Was there a particular version that went wrong? Was it an input we weren't expecting? Was it a scenario that our prompt just didn't handle? Or did the model hallucinate or drift over time? Okay. So logging that information is going to be key. And this opens up another set of management controls that we need to look at as saying, if we are logging, what happens to data privacy? We need to make sure that whatever we're logging complies with data privacy as well. And the last key one is budget for consumption and not CapEx, and make sure you have this conversation with your finance teams early. As you shift more to AI, you are shifting from a CapEx-based model to an OpEx-based model. And that has a significant impact for quite a few businesses. Okay.
Aneesh, you mentioned token counts earlier, and then your last point there was, OpEx rather than CapEx. Could you just explain tokens, how they work, like why it's different to the way computer systems have typically been priced in the past?
Sure. So when we take CapEx, effectively, capital expenditure is putting the cost of an enterprise system onto your balance sheet, and it's shoring up your asset base. And the value of that is realized over a number of years, and it's that depreciation that effectively comes into your P&L. So you could pay £1 million for a system in year 1, and say my realizable value for that is across 3 years. So even though the cash outflow is £1 million, you're only taking 333,000 into your books in year 1 as a cost. So you're still incurring cost, but the impact on your annual P&L is lower because it's sitting on your balance sheet as an asset. When we come to OpEx, anything that has to have a usable value for it to be capitalized. When we're looking at AI costs are incurred and utilized on that particular transaction. So there is no future value that we could move to the balance sheet. Yes, there's an element of building the AI model that we could capitalize and say associate a time with, but a large chunk of that is going to be OpEx or operational expenditure. So it goes straight to your P&L. The second part of that is what is a token and how many tokens it uses. If you think of AI, end of the day, AI is an algorithm. It's an algorithm that's still running on computing systems. And what we have to do is we have to pay for what that cost of that computing could be. That computing includes infrastructure that our provider is running. So if it's ChatGPT, OpenAI has servers running in the back. So when you fire a query, there's a bunch of programs that run that generate an output. The cost of those servers, the cost of building the model, and the cost of actual any other costs that they're incurring that helps us go from a question to an answer is effectively what they're charging as tokens. We have rough understanding of what a token is, but in reality, we find out the tokens that are used after a transaction has taken place. So you would normally get back with your API response, you would get back saying, I have used up X number of tokens. Okay. There is no easy way to estimate tokens. The only way you do it is you say, here's a set of sample transactions I have, average it across those transactions. If you average it across 100 transactions and then you say I have 10,000 transactions, hopefully the cost of 10,000 will be 100 times your 100. Or 1,000 times your 100 transactions that you've incurred. Okay, so you have to do an estimate, arrive at an average of a token usage per transaction, multiplied by a number of transactions, and that becomes your total cost that you are likely to incur. But how much you will incur, you'll only find out after you have incurred it, not before. Okay. So tokens is effectively a proxy for using the compute services provided by the model provider.
So it's like charging for a thought. Every time we have a thought is a charge.
Every time you have your thought analyzed and you want some output from it, incurs a charge. Yes. Yeah. What's happening is the reason why ChatGPT reached 100 million users so quick is, one, they put out a free model. So there was no barrier to usage of it. And anybody could go to a website and start using ChatGPT. It was like anything that's free. Somebody said it really nice. If the best thing with free is if you're not paying for it, you are the product. So what we effectively did was we gave a lot of data, a lot of usage behavior through that. Now we wanted to make it safe. So we got all the providers started offering a pro version and different levels of pro version, which offered additional capacity to use their use resources. It offered additional capability for data safety and so on. And so that's when they started charging. They put it out because they were building models, they needed usage. They put out a guess. How much would I use for $20 versus what you will use for $20? They're hoping across 100 million users, they can get an average. Okay. And that's where the 20 comes in from. But that doesn't work for enterprise. So we cannot take a business process and put it out there and say that it's going to come under $20. That's personal AI. That will not work for enterprise AI. Enterprise AI is costed per tokens and per usage of it.
Thank you.
Sharon thinks you're being a bit harsh with your thoughts.
Yeah, well, I was going to say some people's brains will definitely be a lot more expensive than others, and I would like to think I'll be on the lower end, whereas Aneesh probably on the other end based on how much you know about all this stuff. Yeah, I think you'll be all right, Sharon. Don't worry. Thank you, Aneesh. I'm just going to see if there's any questions for Aneesh up to this point. Just give it a quick pause, see if there's anything else come through. I won't wait in silence just in case there is, but just make sure you type away if there are. I forgot to mention that at the start. Okay. Now, there is a lot to think about as we all keep hearing with AI and especially generative AI, and Aneesh has been kind enough to walk us through quite a lot of the things that I guess make up what we need to be thinking about. But one, we want to try and boil it down, right? We want to try and boil it down into things that we can actually think about without trying to boil the ocean too much. Now, what we want to try and do is look at those, breaking up into those bite-sized chunks. That's the first step. So rather than looking at, right, I want to do my entire accounts payable function, here you go, AI, try and take care of this. We want to look at our accounts payable function and then start to break that into chunks that we can look at with AI and say box it off into something else. So a good example of that will be classify invoices into the different types of information that I expect to see on an invoice. That'll be one bite-sized chunk. When we've got that information, it might be then factor that into different size types that will require human approval because they're over a certain value or under a certain value if they're below the threshold that's there. But always try and make it into those bite-sized chunks that mean that you're not trying to give AI everything, because Aneesh gave a good example earlier. If you just bring someone into the business and that even if they know a lot about the process that they're supposed to be doing because they've done it for another organization, it doesn't mean they're going to know your business straight away as well. The second thing that you want to think about is that accountability side and trying to make sure that you're identifying an owner for the things that we're going to get AI to look at. So if we're looking at a task, who's going to be the person that's accountable at the end of that? That is actually a person. That's someone where the buck stops and the decision is going to go to them. We need to make sure that you're not looking at something like, right, we're going to make this vendor is responsible for their AI models that are coming through, or that model is going to be accountable for the bits that come out of it, because at the end of the day, that isn't actually any accountability. That's just passing the buck, and it's really skirting the issue and avoiding the question. They are not accountable parties. inside a business, there needs to be a person. If you get an AI from a supplier, again, you're going to make sure that you've got your point of contact and your level of responsibility and accountability from there. Excuse me. And then at the enterprise side, again, you do need to be thinking about what your AI management model is going to be. So AI needs to fit around your existing enterprise system management. It can't be something that just spins off on its own and then has as a secondary regime to what the organization and how the organization is run. And that's probably one of the biggest things that businesses are trying to work out, how they do that, how they fit it in their existing ecosystem, and how does AI follow the rules that all employees need to follow, and how do they how does it all come together? That will be the thing that we're actually going to talk about on the next month webinar of these. So we'll get one of our customers on for this session, and it'll be I won't say the name yet because we've just got to make sure that we get the date lined up. But if people were registered to what this webinar was going to be a few days ago, we've actually moved him off of this webinar and onto the next one so we can talk about this. But he's a technology leader at one of our enterprise customers. So what he's going to do is he's going to talk about how he's actually approaching this point number 3 in particular, how he's building out his AI policy and his management model for the business. So that'll be quite an exciting session that we get to. Just going to check that there's no more questions coming through. No, right. Okay, so that's okay. Right, we unbelievably, again, we've been going 37 minutes, which I find amazing. But invites for the next webinar are going to be sent out on how to establish that AI management model. They'll be going through later this week, so keep an eye on your inbox for those. The final things that we're going to look at is if you wanted to talk to Centelli, we're obviously doing this because we are trying to educate, but we do love the fact that people then might want to have conversations with us afterwards to talk about AI and their challenges. And some of the opportunities as well, because there are a lot of challenges with AI, but there's a lot of opportunities as well. So we can look at different things like talk through the use cases that you've got in mind, talk about some of the challenges that you're having within the business and if AI can go with those, talk about agents and how that become part of the whole automation conversation. And then the governance side of it as well, if we can look at how to build that audit and observability scaffolding side around it as well. So I'll leave it on the screen for a couple of minutes as people start to dip out, book an appointment through the QR code. You can get all the information on our website. But I'm just going to check if there's no more questions that came through. No, we are all good. Thank you everyone for joining this month's edition, and it will be the middle of June before we know it, and we'll have one of our customers on talking about their management model. Thanks ever so much, and see you soon.